Hey guys, it's Sarah from She's Crafty and She Knows It, and I'm here today to show you how to hand knit a rib stitch blanket. So in knitting, a rib stitch is a stitch that creates ribs or textured vertical stripes. The rib stitch consists of columns of alternating knit stitches and purl stitches. Don't worry, you don't need any knitting experience to do this. I know when I throw around different terms like knitting and purling, it might scare you off, but don't be scared, you got this. So if you watched my first video on how to hand knit a blanket, that video just taught only the knit stitch, which kind of makes that pretty V shape. But on the back of that blanket, when you flip it over, are a bunch of little bumps, and those bumps are what purl stitches look like. So we'll be using both knit stitches and purl stitches today. So let's get started so that you can see how easy it really is. Okay, so here's the yarn that we're going to use. It's really nice, chunky, chenille type feeling yarn that I know you're going to love. It's really fuzzy and you'll love cuddling under your big, chunky hand knit blanket. So I made myself a little pattern to use. You can make your own as well. And it shows the knit stitch is kind of like a little oblong shape to represent the long V shape that is the knit stitch. And then the purl has like a little horizontal type shape next to it because the purl stitch is kind of that horizontal bump. And so you'll just follow this pattern. The oblong vertical shapes are the knit stitches and the horizontal little oblong things are the purl stitches. I hope that is clear and that makes sense. Okay, so I have the end of my working yarn here. I'm going to leave about maybe 12 to 18 inches at the end and then get started with the chain stitch. So the chain stitch, you wrap it around your hand and then you're going to stick your fingers through the hole and pull it through, and that's the first loop of the chain stitch. Now to make a chain stitch, you need to know how many stitches you need. So you have to count on your pattern how many stitches you're going to have all together, and the chain stitch has to be that many stitches long. So I know that my chain stitch needs to be 19 stitches long. Okay, so I already have the first stitch. I'm going to stick my fingers through the first stitch and pull another loop through. Stick your fingers through again and pull another loop, and you're going to keep doing that. So you're sticking your fingers through the existing loop, pulling a new one through. This is the chain stitch. You just keep doing this until you have the right number that you need. So for me, I'm going to do it until I have 19 stitches. Okay, so here's my chain stitch. I always go back and double check and count every stitch to make sure that I have the right number. It's really important that you have the right number for the pattern that you're following. So to count the chain stitch, you're going to find each little hump. So at the top, there's like a little tiny curve at the top right there, and you're going to count each one as a stitch. So go through and count each one of those to make sure that you have the exact number that you need. So now that I know that I have the right number, I'm going to start my pattern. The very last loop down there on the right is where you're going to knit, right there. So you're going to stick your fingers through the hole and pull it up. And this is going to be your first knit stitch. So you're finding those little humps that we counted before when we counted each little hole to see that there was the right number of chain stitch. That's where you pull it through. So you're pulling it, you're sticking your finger through the hole, pulling the loop up to the front. So that's the knit stitch, real basic. You're sticking your fingers through the hole and pulling it up to the front. Now we purl. So instead of sticking your fingers through the hole, you pull the working yarn to the front. This is the difference with the purl. And you stick the yarn through the hole from the front to the back. You're going to do it again. Now there's two purls. So stick your yarn through the hole from the front to the back. You can already see they look a little bit different. On our pattern, we have two more knits. The working yarn goes to the back. You stick your fingers through the hole and you bring the yarn to the front, through the hole to the front. You're going to knit again, bringing the yarn to the front, and now we have two more purls. So for the purls, remember you're pushing the yarn through the hole from the front to the back. That's the only difference, really. The whole thing is how the yarn is going through the hole. So with knitting, it's going from the back to the front. You're sticking your fingers through the hole and you're pulling it to the front. And then the purling, you're pushing it from the front to the back. That's all you have to get a hang of. It's just doing that and then following the pattern. So now you're watching me knit. I'm pulling it through. I'm knitting the center. So there's 3 knits in the center. Right there, you can already see the pattern coming to life. And now I have the purls where you push it from the front to the back. Push it through the hole from the front to the back. And now I'm back to the 2 knits. So the knit goes from the back to the front. Pull it through. You're going to do it 2 times in a row. And then we're to the purl again. The purl, you push it from the front to the back. The first row is probably the most complicated because you don't have much to go off. Once you've done it, you're following the same pattern the entire time. And it's kind of easy already to tell which one's which. So I promise you'll get used to it. It will get much easier. So now we've just completed the first row. That is it. That's all the loops, all the stitches for the very first row, and we're going to go back across. And so this pattern is completely symmetrical. So you're going to do the same thing again, going back across now from left to right. Okay, so now we're going to knit that left loop. We're going to stick our fingers through, pull up another knit loop, stick your fingers through, pull up another knit loop, and now it's time to purl again. So same things before, you pull the working yarn to the front. Sometimes you need to pull out a lot more working yarn, and you're going to stick the working yarn through the hole from the front to the back. So I'm sticking it through and pushing it, and I'm pushing it through the next one for another purl. And then I know that I have 2 knits now. For the knits, the working yarn's in the back, and you're bringing it from the back, pulling it through to the front. So you can already kind of see where it's knitting, how the loops are laying different than the purl loop. So after I do it for a while, I can kind of tell just by looking which ones are which. It gets really easy to tell what you're doing. The most important part is to make sure you don't miss any loops. Sometimes there's loops hiding somewhere, like a little stitch is hiding, you can't see it. So just follow the pattern and make sure that you're hitting every single loop and not missing anything. So now we're back. I already did the center, the 3 knits in a row. I'm back to the 2 purls. So you push it from the front to the back. You're pushing the yarn through. So that's 2 purls, and now I'm back to 2 knits, putting my fingers through the loop and pulling it through. And if a loop's too big, you can kind of move the yarn, pull it, make the loops the right size. I'm not very particular. Some people like measure each loop, make sure each loop is 3 fingers wide or whatever. I just kind of do it where they look similar and try to have fun with it and not be too uptight about how perfect it is. Although that one was huge. So you got to fix it. If it's ginormous, you got to fix it a little bit. So that is the completed second row of following the pattern. And now you just go back across. You're going to go back and forth over and over again following the same pattern. So now you can see I'm already doing the first 2 knits again. So I'm hoping that you understand why I made the little pattern key the way that I did. So the knit stitches are kind of those V's that are, you can tell they're kind of more oblong and vertical versus the purl are kind of the horizontal humps. So I want it to be obvious that when you're looking, there's the horizontal humps. Okay, that's a purl. Okay, there's the vertical V's. That's a knit stitch. So that's why I made the pattern that way, so that hopefully it's kind of a good visual representation of what you're doing. Okay, and so for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and speed this video up a little bit so that you can see me working and just following the pattern back and forth across, and you're going to watch me just continue to knit and purl until it's time for me to add another skein of yarn. And guys, there's no shame in going back to the basics. So if you're trying to follow along and for some reason the alternating knitting and purling is just a little bit too complicated, it's okay. You can go back to the first video I did that's just the plain knitting. Every stitch is knitting. You don't have to follow a pattern or anything, and you're just doing the same stitch every single time. That's a good place to start. So I know that beginners can start here too and never have knitting experience, but if you want something a little bit more basic, you can go watch the very first video. So I've put the link to that video in the description of this video so that it's easy to find, and that's a really quick and easy just how to hand knit a blanket video. So hopefully as you're watching this, it's getting really easy to see the pattern come to life. So now you can really see all the V's from the knit stitches and then the horizontal bumps from the purl stitches. So to me, it's easy just to look at it and you can tell right away where the purl stitches are and where the knit stitches are. And so now it's making that really pretty rib stitch, which is those columns that are alternating knit stitches and purl stitches are making these beautiful textured vertical rib stripes, which are just so pretty. Okay guys, so you can see that I have come to the end of the skein. There's maybe 12 to 18 inches left of yarn, and so I'm going to go ahead and add on a new skein of yarn. So let me get the yarn real quick, pull out the end, and I'm just going to tie a basic knot together to join these. This is not the wool yarn where you can kind of blend it together and work it together. The chenille is a little bit different. There's a string inside, and it really, for me personally, I like to tie them together in a knot because I have 3 little girls who are going to use this blanket for movie nights and cuddle under it, and I want it to be really secure and sturdy. So I just tie a normal knot, I pull on those ends that are going to be cut, and then I also pull the other direction on the yarn that's staying, the yarn that you're knitting with. So kind of pull there, and then I pull, so you're pulling on all 4 pieces that are part of the knot. I hope that makes sense. So I kind of pull back and forth to make sure it's really sturdy. The chenille yarn does, like I said, kind of have like a string inside of it, and so you don't want to just tug and tug because it can break. Cut the ends, and then I like to basically hide the knot in between stitches. So right there you can see that it's already kind of between the stitches, and then you keep knitting. If the ends are longer than you want, you can always go back and trim them a little bit shorter, like it's sticking up a little bit more than I would like. So I'm just going to trim off a little bit, and that way you really can't see it. It's stuck right there. This yarn's so fluffy, you're not going to notice a knot. It's going to be very secure, and it's going to hold up really well. So that's it, and then you just go back and you keep following the pattern, and you keep going until it's time to add another skein. So I'm going to pull out a bunch of the working yarn so that sometimes when it's really, really tight and there's not enough working yarn, it's easy for it to kind of pull on the loops when you're trying to knit. So I just pull out a bunch of working yarn at once and then just keep going and following the pattern all the way across, back and forth. And then when it's time to add on another skein, then you stop and add on another skein. Okay, so this happens a lot. Sometimes when you're hand knitting, if you pull the yarn too hard, it can pull out one of the stitches. So I don't know if you can see, but right there, there is a stitch that is dropped. So see, there's like a loop and then there's this big piece of yarn that was supposed to have gone through there. So I can tell that it's a purl stitch that's become messed up. And so if you kept knitting and just left it like that, the blanket could unravel. But I just want to show you what to do because I don't want this to happen to you and you freak out and undo the whole blanket because you don't need to. It's fixable. So right there, this yarn just needs to be pushed through the loop. It's a purl stitch. It needs to be pushed through just like that. That's it. And then you can keep going. So don't panic. Pretty much everything is fixable if you find it right away. So let me undo both of those. So now I have 2 purl stitches and this big piece of yarn right here that's come undone. If I didn't fix it, it would unravel and be a big mess. But I can just push it right back through and then keep going across like I was supposed to. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you were able to see that okay. If you get somewhere and a stitch has been pulled out and there's a big piece of loose yarn like that, you just stick it back through the way it was supposed to. So sometimes loops just come undone like that. The stitches come undone when you're doing it. But like I said, pretty much everything's fixable if you catch it while you're doing the blanket. Now, if you were to keep knitting and find that when you were, 5 rows above it, well, that might be a problem. You'd have to go undo the blanket back to where you had dropped the stitch. Dropping the stitch just means that somehow there was a stitch that didn't get done like it was supposed to. So there's a knit stitch somewhere that you didn't catch. And so that's why I said early on, the main thing to do is follow the pattern and make sure that you don't miss a stitch. Because sometimes the stitches hide behind other stitches and you forget that it was there and it's easy to skip one. So just make sure you don't skip any stitches. Like I said, if they come undone, you can find a way to stick the yarn back through. It's not a big deal, I promise. Okay, so now it's time to add on our third skein. So we're going to do it exactly like we did it last time. I'm going to grab a new skein and just go ahead and tie a knot, and we're going to hide that knot right in between the stitches. So just like we did last time, you're going to tug gently but firmly on all 4 ends that are going into the knot and just make sure it's really tight in there and then trim the ends. Okay, and just like last time, you're going to keep following the pattern across. You can see that the knot is hidden really well between the stitches, and you're just going to keep following the pattern across, back and forth until it's time to add the last skein. We're going to be using 4 skeins of this yarn to make a really nice size throw blanket. Okay, so now we're at the end of the 3rd skein and it's time to add on the 4th skein, which is the final skein. So we're almost there. We're going to do it just like we did it every other time. Tie a knot, trim the ends, and hide the knot in between the stitches. And then you're just going to keep on knitting like you've been doing, following the pattern the entire time until we get to the end of the 4th skein. And then I'm going to show you how to finish off the blanket and do that closing stitch, which is going to finish it off and make it look so pretty. Okay, so I've knitted it until the very end, and this is all that I have left. So not very much. I don't want to do another row because I want to make sure that I have plenty for the very end. And so we're going to do the ending stitch to finish it off. The blanket's a great length now, and it's perfect the way I want it. And so what you're going to do to finish it off is you're going to start with the very last loop that's opposite of this working yarn. So over here is the working yarn. So you're going to go to finish it off to the last loop on the opposite. So way over here, this last loop right there. And what you're going to do is take that last stitch and you're going to put that last stitch over the stitch next to it and pull that other one through. So remember, it's the opposite of the working yarn. Take that last stitch right here and you're going to put it over the stitch next to it and pull that stitch through. And you're going to keep doing that. So now let me show you one more time. Take that stitch, put it over the stitch next to it and pull that stitch through. Take that stitch over the one next to it and pull it through. This is how you're casting it off. Over the one next to it, pull that one through. And you're going to keep doing this all the way across. So this is how it's binding it off and finishing the blanket to make it look really, really pretty, and everything is bound off and nothing can unravel. So you're putting the stitch working from right to left, or if you end on the other side, it's okay. You can do this either direction, but you're always starting on the opposite side of that working yarn. So do the loop, go over the one next to it and pull that one through. Go all the way across. Now just be careful that you don't miss any loops. Just take your time. Don't rush and just keep going across. You want to make sure that you get every single loop. So you can see how it's making a really pretty finishing stitch that's just binding everything off. So now we're coming up on the very last stitch right there, and you go over it, and now you have the final stitch right there. Look how pretty the top of it is. See, it looks really nice. So now that you have that final loop on the end, you're going to pull that working yarn through it. So all that long string right there, you're going to pull it through this last loop and pull it really tight. Now you don't have to tie a knot. You could pull it really tight and weave some of the extra into the blanket. I always tie a knot. I'm a sucker for tying knots, and I know sometimes people fuss at me, but with 3 little kids, I'm sorry, an extra knot is just nice to have. So I put a knot there, and then I just cut some of it and weave the rest of it into the blanket, and that way you have a little bit of extra yarn. If something were to come unravel or something was to happen, I like to just have a little bit of extra yarn. You don't need, this is like, 2.5, 3 feet. You don't need all of that. So really, you could trim it down to 12 inches or whatever and just weave 12 inches through. It's hard to even weave it when it's 3 feet long. So just weave that extra through so you have something to work with if for some reason you needed it. But like I said, that's not necessary. You don't have to weave anything through it all if you don't want to. That's just how I learned to do it and how I've always done it. So really, you're finishing it completely off and it's looking so nice. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the very beginning where we started with the chain stitch and do the same thing. So down at the very bottom, I have like a little bit of a tail from the beginning of the chain stitch. We had that extra yarn, and I'm just going to weave this extra yarn back into the chain stitch. You can cut it off if you want to. I just like to save a little bit of extra, like I said, so that nothing can come unraveled. I don't know why. I'm kind of weird and OCD about always having a little bit, like an extra foot of yarn. You do not have to do that. That is just how I was taught, and that's how I've always done it. So I kind of just weave it into the chain stitch, cut some off, and then you have your extra there. And guys, that's it. We just finished an entire blanket, and I told you it wasn't that complicated, and it's gorgeous, right? And I did it all with my hands, and you can too. Okay, so I know I'm going to get asked this question. I used 4 skeins of yarn, and that yarn is linked in the description below this video, but the size of your blanket will depend on which yarn you use, how many yards are in the skein, and how big your loops are. So for my blanket, using 4 skeins of that yarn, and you saw the size loops that I used, my blanket is 60 inches long by about 48 inches wide. It is a great throw blanket size for us. So 4 skeins worked great for me, and it is our go-to cozy blanket for movie night. So make all the gorgeous hand knit blankets. You're going to love them, and so are your friends and family. So they are the perfect gifts. Wrap them up, give them for birthday, Valentine's, your parents' anniversary, Christmas gifts, you name it, people will love them. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up and make sure you subscribe for more videos. Bye guys!